Back in the day, we were served some repulsive-looking dishes. But surprise, surprise, a lot of them actually tasted pretty darn good. Don't run off until you've tried these ugly yet pleasantly surprising bites from before. Let's start things off strong with ham and bananas hollandaise. This thing will get you laughed right out of a dinner party today. But back in its heyday, it was a dish that regularly made it into Better Homes and Gardens cookbooks. It looked like something scraped off the floor of a high school cafeteria in 1963, if I can be that honest. The ham is curled up a little at the edges. The banana gets mushy, and the sauce sort of pools around everything like yellow lava. If for some reason you're looking to remake this mid-century classic, take a few ripe bananas, peeled and laid out like logs on a baking dish. Then you wrap each banana in a slice of deli ham. Already sounds like a prank, doesn't it? But we're not done. You take this odd little roll-up and you bake it. Warm bananas and warm ham? Yeah, I'm sure you see why folks would give you side-eye if you serve that up for dinner later. Once they're good and hot, you smother the whole thing in hollandaise sauce. That thick, eggy, lemony sauce, usually reserved for eggs, Benedict got dumped right over those ham banana bundles. Now, here's the thing most folks don't know. It tasted real good. There was this sweet and salty contrast, like how pineapple works on ham or a Monte Cristo sandwich with a dusting of powdered sugar. The banana softened just right, turned creamy almost, and the ham brought the savory punch. Then that buttery hollandaise came in with just enough tang to cut through the richness. It wasn't something you'd eat every day, but once in a while, with the right crowd and a side of Jell-O salad, this hit the spot. You have the 60s to thank for this sloppy-looking dish. Ham and bananas hollandaise was mostly pushed by the food companies and magazine test kitchens looking to convince housewives they could be gourmet chefs right from the suburbs. It looked like a mess, I won't lie. But once you got past the first bite, you'll be licking your plate in no time. Next up is a dish that scared me when I saw it at the dinner table, glacé fish mold. Saying the name out loud makes you think you're about to dig in something fancy. But when this dish came out of the fridge, we weren't thinking fine dining. We were wondering if we'd accidentally walked into a taxidermy exhibit. Glacé fish mold was the pinnacle of the mid-century obsession with molded foods. It was part gelatin, part seafood salad, and part visual horror, usually shaped like a fish, complete with pimento eyes and maybe a sprig of parsley for the gills. This thing was as much a centerpiece as it was a meal. You'd find it glistening on a tray of lettuce leaves, maybe surrounded by deviled eggs or olives, like some sort of underwater relic pulled straight from a culinary Atlantis. The glacé part came from unflavored gelatin, often mixed with tomato juice or fish stock to create the base. That gave it a reddish or pale amber tint, already a little unsettling to the eye. Into that slippery base went a whole mix of seafood odds and ends. Flaked white fish, some shrimp, diced celery, onions, capers, and, because this was the golden age of throw it all in, hard-boiled eggs or olives chopped up fine. To top it off, mayonnaise was either blended in or served on the side in some decorative rosette, as if that was going to reassure anyone. When it finally set and came out of the mold, this fish-shaped creation looked like it had just risen from the depths, cold, glossy, with chunks of indistinguishable bits suspended like fossils in amber. It wasn't exactly appetizing to look at. In fact, you had to want to like it. It looked like something that belonged in a museum, not a dining room. But, and this is a big but, if you managed to get past the appearance, glacé fish mold wasn't half bad. The gelatin had a mild tang from the tomato juice or vinegar, and the fish brought that soft, flaky bite. The crunch from the celery gave it some life, and if it was made right, with seasoning and care, It had the chilled, briny richness of a good seafood salad, cold, savory, refreshing on a hot summer day, sort of like eating the ocean in a slice. This dish came from a time when food presentation mattered just as much as taste, maybe more. It was a conversation piece, a bit of culinary theater. Housewives in the 50s and 60s wanted to impress their guests with good food, and if they could make it look pretty in the process, even better. And nothing said, "I went the extra mile," like a glistening, gelatinous fish staring you down from across the buffet. Sure, today it might seem like something out of a horror movie, but back then it was bold. I would even go far as to say that it was stylish, and if you closed your eyes, it actually wasn't half bad. Strange times, strange dishes, but Lord, were they pumped with personality. Let's slide over to something a little more down-home, spaghetti pie. Yep, that's right. Somebody, somewhere, looked at a plate of leftover spaghetti and thought, what if this were a pie? Now, don't go picturing a sweet slice of dessert. This was a savory number, though it sure looked confused about what it wanted to be. Imagine a pie crust made entirely out of cooked spaghetti. You'd take the noodles, toss them with eggs and a bit of Parmesan, then press that mixture into a pie pan like you were making a nest for a bald eagle. Once that crust firmed up a bit in the oven, you'd fill it with a layer of ricotta or cottage cheese, spoon on some marinara, toss in ground beef or sausage, and crown it all with shredded mozzarella. Then back in the oven it went, baking into a solid slab of what looked like someone tried to build lasagna but forgot the recipe halfway through. If it made it on this list, you know it wasn't the prettiest dish on the table. When you sliced into it, you had these tangled noodle layers sticking out every which way, sauce bleeding into the eggy pasta walls, and gooey cheese stretching like it was trying to escape. Looked like a casserole that got into a bar fight. But looks aside, it was as good as any other home cooking. The bottom crust got crispy at the edges, like those golden bits of spaghetti that stick to the pan when you fry leftovers. The eggs held everything together, giving the dish this quiche meets pasta feel, and the top, bubbling cheese over seasoned meat and tangy sauce, made it rich, hearty, and satisfying in a way that felt like Sunday supper at Grandma's if Grandma had a wild streak. Spaghetti pie hit its stride in the 70s and 80s, during that golden age of inventive casseroles and budget-stretching meals. It was born in church cookbooks, PTA potlucks, and probably the back of a cremette pasta box. It looked ugly, no doubt, but no one really cared as long as it tasted good, and it reheated like a dream. Speaking of dishes that walk the line between dinner and dessert, let me take you back to one of the most polarizing items ever to hit the holiday table: sweet potato casserole with marshmallows. Now, don't get me wrong, sweet potatoes are great. Roasted, mashed, baked into a pie, folks have loved them for generations. But somewhere in the early to mid-20th century, when food companies started pushing recipes onto every box and magazine cover, someone got the bright idea to take those naturally sweet, buttery spuds and top them with a layer of marshmallows. You remember the sight, a casserole as orange as a traffic cone, bubbling hot from the oven with those sticky little white clouds puffed up and toasted brown on top. Looked like a science experiment in a kindergarten art class. And when those marshmallows cooled even a little, they got this sort of crust, syrupy underneath, rubbery in spots, sticky enough to glue your dentures together if you weren't careful. To a first-timer, it looked ridiculous, more like a failed dessert than a respectable side dish. And every Thanksgiving, at least one relative who would speak against it, as if they'd never seen a candied apple or a glazed carrot before. But if it was made right, with some love and real butter, brown sugar, and a touch of cinnamon or a splash of orange juice, it was heavenly. The marshmallows melted down into a caramel-like topping, adding this toasted sweetness that played off the earthy, soft sweet potatoes in the best way. The deep, almost squash-like flavor of the potato with the sugary crust on top was a warm hug in casserole form. Hideous, maybe? Confusing? Definitely. But one bite in, and nobody cared that it was technically a vegetable hiding under a candy coating. Since we're taking a tour through American dishes that looked all kinds of wrong but somehow worked, we might as well make a stop in Cincinnati, home of that beautiful, baffling mess known as Cincinnati Chile. For folks who've never seen it before, this stuff will stop you in your tracks. You hear the word chili, and you're probably picturing a thick, hearty bowl of beans and beef with a cornbread muffin on the side. You know, Texas style or something like it. But this ain't that. Not even close. Cincinnati chili gets ladled over a plate of plain spaghetti. You get this thin, brown, almost soupy meat sauce that looks more like something you'd mop up with a paper towel than put on pasta. It's got ground beef, sure, but also a spice blend straight from Grandma's holiday cookie tin. Cinnamon, allspice, sometimes even chocolate. But I think that last one's more of a tall tale than fact. Whatever's in it, there were no beans unless you asked for them. Then come the toppings, which are called ways. Two-way is just chili and spaghetti. Three-way adds a mountain of shredded cheddar cheese. Four-way has onions or beans thrown in. And five-way has onions and beans, piled high like a chili-themed school project. The first time you lay eyes on it, you might think someone made a mistake in the kitchen. The chili looks like stew, the cheese is cold and piled on like insulation, and the spaghetti's just kind of there. It doesn't look like it should work. Frankly, it looks like someone dumped a wet trash bag onto a plate and hoped for the best. But the taste is where Cincinnati chili earns its stripes. This chili is not about heat. It's about that sweet, savory flavor that catches you off guard. The spices warm you up from the inside, and the meat sauce soaks into the noodles just enough to turn it into a filling meal. The cold cheese melts slowly as you eat, adding a creamy texture to the bite. It's weird, yeah, but the good kind of weird, like chili met Greek pasticcio at a Midwestern potluck. It was actually invented by Macedonian immigrants in the 1920s, adapting Mediterranean spice profiles to American tastes. What they came up with became a local legend, served in diners and chili parlors all over Ohio. You'll find it at Skyline, Gold Star, and 100 little mom-and-pop joints with linoleum floors and booths that squeak when you sit down. Cincinnati chili is one of those dishes where, once you get it, you get it. Now, if there was ever a dish that captured the essence of mid-century with a side of gelatin, it had to be perfection salad. Just the name alone sounds like something dreamed up in a 1950s test kitchen by a woman wearing pearls and heels while mixing dinner in high heels. But when you laid eyes on it, well, perfection might not be the word you'd pick. It's a clear, wobbly mold of Jell-O suspended with what looked like a tossed salad that had taken a wrong turn into dessert. Inside that glistening dome were crunchy slivers of cabbage, shredded carrots, chopped celery, pimentos for color, sometimes even olives. Yeah, olives in Jell-O. It looked like someone had emptied the crisper drawer into a lava lamp. The whole thing shimmered like a window display at the grocery store. And when you sliced into it, it gave that signature gelatinous wiggle. It was usually served cold, in tidy little slices on a bed of lettuce, with a dollop of mayonnaise or a scoop of cottage cheese on the side, because nothing says bon appetit like mayo on Jell-O. And yet, somehow it worked. It was crisp and refreshing, especially in the summer, with a bright, sweet and sour tang from the flavored gelatin, a crunch from the vegetables, and a savory little kick from the extras hiding inside. It didn't taste like dessert, not really, but it wasn't exactly a salad either. It lived in this odd little in-between world where gelatin was king and rules didn't apply. Perfection salad got its start around the early 1900s, when Knox Gelatin started publishing recipes to encourage Americans to think of gelatin as more than just a dessert. It peaked in popularity mid-century, when molded salads were all the rage and food presentation was treated like an art form. You could say it looked like it belonged in a science exhibit more than a supper table. But once you got past the strange appearance, it had a surprisingly light and zippy flavor that made it a favorite at picnics, church potlucks, and holiday buffets. Sometimes, the ugliest food hides the most beautiful flavors. 7-Up baked beans sounds like something a kid would invent at a backyard barbecue when nobody's watching the table. And yet, this was a real recipe that made it into cookbooks and cookouts. You start with your standard baked bean base, canned pork and beans, some onion, ketchup, or tomato sauce, a little mustard, and brown sugar. But then, here comes the twist. You pour in a can of 7-Up. The clear lemon-lime soda fizzes and bubbles as it mixes with the thick sauce. And for a second, you're probably wondering if you've ruined the whole thing. Before it goes in the oven, it looks odd, watery, too sweet, like it's confused about whether it's a side dish or a dessert. That brightness from the soda, the smell of syrup and citrus, cuts through the savory smell of the beans. And you get this dish that smells like a contradiction. And when it comes out, it still doesn't look like much. Just a big, brown, bubbling pan of beans, same as always. Until you take that first spoonful, the 7-Up, oddly enough, does something magical in the oven. It doesn't make the beans taste like soda. What it does do is lighten the texture, mellow the acid of the tomatoes, and give the sauce this subtle, sweet tang that lingers on the back of your tongue. The sugar caramelizes around the edges, giving it that sticky, smoky depth you want in a baked bean dish, but with a little something extra. Not quite citrus, not quite candy, just that bright note that's as refreshing on beans as it is in a soda. From the 1950s through the 70s, you'd find 7-Up or Sprite sneaking into all kinds of dishes, from glazes to Jell-O to, yep, baked beans. Looked like a bad idea on paper, but tasted great. Let's switch things up for a second. Have you ever eaten something that looked amazing but tasted awful? How did that go? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Bonus points if it came out of a Jell-O mold. Monterey souffle salad, or in this case, the salad course. The name makes it sound like something you'd get at a seaside luncheon with white gloves and little sandwiches. But when you actually saw it jiggling there on the table, you'd wonder who thought this was a good idea. Monterey souffle salad was another proud soldier in the great army of gelatin-based salads that marched through American kitchens of yesteryear. To make it, you'd dissolve a packet of lime Jell-O and mix it up with mayonnaise. Yes, mayonnaise. And then fold in shredded cheddar cheese, crushed pineapple, diced celery, and chopped green pepper. Some recipes even added vinegar or horseradish for a little kick. And if that wasn't enough chaos, you'd whip evaporated milk until it was fluffy and fold that in too. The whole thing would be poured into a mold and chilled until it was firm enough to hold its wobbly top hat shape. And when it hit the table, you couldn't help but stare. It looked like someone tried to taxidermy a salad. But once you summoned the courage to scoop out a slice and let it slide onto your plate, it somehow tasted good. It was a cold, savory sweet salad that hit especially nice on a hot day, when you didn't have enough appetite for something heavy. Let's follow that up with yet another gelatin-based food. This is the last one, I promise. Ring around the tuna is a dish so visually bizarre, folks would scan it half curious, half afraid. And they'd be right to worry, because this was one of those mid-century molded salads that looked like dessert but was most certainly not. It's a large gelatin ring made with lemon or lime Jell-O shimmering like stained glass under the kitchen light. But don't let that pretty color fool you. Suspended inside this jiggling halo were flecks of pimento, chopped celery, grated onion, and the star of the show, canned tuna, floating in citrusy gelatin. The tuna wasn't pureed or disguised. It was chunked or flaked and packed in among the vegetables like a salad trapped in amber. And just in case that wasn't enough to make you pause, it was served with a generous dollop of mayonnaise in the center, spooned into the middle of the mold like some kind of ceremonial offering. You'd slice a piece and it would give that satisfying jiggle, the kind only a molded salad can pull off, and the smell would hit. Citrus and fish and mayo, a combo no one expects but somehow existed. And it actually tasted better than it looked. That lemon gelatin, especially when made with a touch less water, had more of a tangy tart bite to it, almost like a vinaigrette in jelly form. The tuna brought saltiness and protein, giving it some weight. The celery and onion added crunch and zest, and that mayo pulled it all together, like a cousin to tuna salad on a hot summer day. Brands like Knox and Jell-O were pushing savory uses hard, and tuna was an affordable protein you could always find in the pantry. It was seen as modern, nutritious, and tidy, exactly the kind of thing you'd serve with pride to guests who wouldn't dare question your culinary ambition. To me, it looked like something that fell off a spaceship, but like I always say, never judge a dish by its wobble. Here's a dish that doesn't look gross in the way the others did, but if you weren't raised around it, deep dish pizza could still throw you for a loop, especially the first time you saw one come to the table. I remember folks from out east used to stare at it like it was some kind of casserole masquerading as a pie. Wait, now that I think about it, that description isn't too far off. It all started in Chicago, back in the 1940s. Pizzeria Uno gets the credit, though there's always debate when it comes to food history. Unlike your usual flat pizza with the sauce on the bottom and cheese on top, Deep Dish flipped the script. This thing was baked in a round steel pan with sides 2 inches tall, almost like a cake tin. First came the thick, buttery crust, pressed up the sides like a pie shell. Then a hearty helping of mozzarella, maybe some sausage or pepperoni or veggies, all tucked in. And right when you thought it was done, bam, the sauce went on top. A chunky, rich tomato sauce, often with a dusting of Parmesan or herbs. To the untrained eye, that looked all wrong. Red on top, cheese hidden somewhere in the middle, and so deep it needed a spatula to serve. I remember some guy visiting from New Jersey once told me it was less pizza and more tomato cake. And he wasn't wrong. It looked heavy, messy, and almost too much to handle. The steaming and bubbling pool of red gave the impression you were about to dive fork first into slop. But as soon as it hits your mouth, it all starts to make sense. When done right, the crust is crisp on the bottom but tender inside, almost like a biscuit crossed with a buttery pie. The cheese, molten and stringy, perfectly sealed beneath that blanket of tomato. And the sauce was bright, garlicky, and tangy enough to cut through all that richness. Every forkful gave you a little crunch, stretch, tang, and spice. The purists might gag at the sight of it, but deep dish pizza is just as good as any other pie. Circus peanuts has been confusing folks for over 100 years, and probably offended just as many taste buds. I can still picture them, sitting in cellophane bags at the 5 and dime, that weird pastel orange color sticking out like a sore thumb. Not orange like a real peanut shell, mind you, more like a radioactive creamsicle. These little guys were shaped roughly like a peanut, though the resemblance ended there. They were soft, but not exactly chewy. More like a cross between marshmallow foam and packing peanut, with a bit of bounce when you bit into one. And the color wasn't the only lie. They didn't taste anything like peanuts either. Nope, they were banana flavored. Banana, not the nice, ripe kind either. more like that artificial banana you'd find in old cough syrup or Runts candy. Circus peanuts first popped up in the late 1800s, sold as penny candy by street vendors. Originally, they were seasonal, couldn't make them year-round because they'd go stale fast. But once cellophane packaging came along in the 1940s, suddenly they were everywhere, shelf-stable and ready to confuse the next generation. You'd see them at gas stations, tucked into Easter baskets, or melting in Grandma's candy dish come summertime. A lot of people couldn't stand them, thought they looked like chewed erasers and tasted like old gum. But if you grew up with them, you got used to that weird, airy texture and that sweet, overripe banana hit. They had this nostalgic charm, like candy from a dream you barely remembered. They weren't for everyone, that's for sure. But Circus peanuts had something both gross and oddly comforting going for it, like the smell of a plastic Halloween mask. You didn't know why you liked them, but once in a while, you'd pop one in your mouth, and for just a second, you were a kid again, standing barefoot on the porch in summer, sticky fingers and all, ugly as sin, tasted like lies. But somehow, they still earned a place in the old American Candy Hall of Fame. Go figure. The tuna berry sandwich was a culinary curveball from the post-war era that made you wonder what folks were thinking. The thought of it can make your stomach twitch a little, am I right? I mean, putting tuna and berries together sounds as weird as a sandwich can get. But this was an honest-to-goodness recipe that kept us fed once upon a time. To make it, grab a can of tuna and mix it with mayonnaise. So far, so normal. Then came the chopped berries. Sometimes even a spoonful of berry jam made it in there. The whole mess was stirred together into a kind of tuna salad meets dessert hybrid and plopped between slices of white bread with lettuce for crunch. Some versions even called for cream cheese to make it extra smooth. And you don't need me to tell you that it looked awful, like someone had accidentally stirred their Thanksgiving leftovers into the tuna fish. Grayish chunks of fish tangled up with red berry flecks, sitting there like some sludge no one wanted to touch. Depending on the berry used, it could take on a pinkish hue, a sort of faded fleshy color that did not inspire confidence. But what's strange is that it wasn't half bad. The berries brought a sweet tart brightness that actually lightened up the tuna, especially if the mayo was heavy. The cranberries gave it a kind of tangy kick, almost like a relish, and the cream cheese added a rich, smooth backdrop. It had a sweet and savory vibe going on, kind of like how folks now pair bacon with maple syrup or throw fruit on their burgers. Once your brain stopped screaming, "This is wrong," your mouth started loving it. Cream of peanut soup confuses just about everyone the first time they hear it. Most folks these days associate peanuts with PB and J, or maybe a candy bar, not a warm, savory bowl of soup. But believe it or not, this one has roots stretching all the way back to colonial Virginia, where peanuts were abundant and cooks weren't afraid to get creative with them. Still, even with that pedigree, it's one of those meals that made people pause at the dinner table. Let's start with the look of it. Cream of peanut soup usually came out in a beige tan hue, thick and velvety, almost like gravy. It was often topped with chopped peanuts or a swirl of cream, which only added to the mystery. And when you first saw it, especially if you weren't expecting it, you might think it was some kind of moldy bowl of porridge. Soup and peanut butter just didn't seem like a natural pairing. It looked gloopy, but it was surprisingly tasty. Rich, nutty, buttery, and not in the sweet way. The base was a combination of onions, celery, chicken broth, and cream, blended with smooth peanut butter to create this deep, earthy flavor. Not overly sweet at all, but savory, with just a hint of natural peanut richness. The onions and broth gave it structure. The cream added body, and the peanut butter tied it all together like a warm southern hug. It was the kind of thing you'd expect to find in an old Williamsburg inn, served in a fine china bowl with a side of cornbread or crusty rolls. Still, it had that gross factor for a lot of folks, but those brave enough to give it a go walked away surprised, maybe even a little impressed. Spam Fiesta. Peach cups were made with these halved canned peaches, each one cradling a scoop of Spam salad in its center. The Spam was sometimes ground, sometimes cubed, mixed with mayonnaise, celery, green peppers. Then, just to really bring the fiesta to life, it was garnished with a sprig of parsley or a maraschino cherry. The result looked like a meat sundae, a strange marriage of dessert and deli tray. Bright pink Spam in a golden fruit half, sweating slightly under the kitchen lights. What did that peach do to deserve this? But you know what? It didn't taste as awful as it looked. In fact, it kind of worked. That Spam mixture, salty, creamy, a little crunchy from the veg, played weirdly well against the sweet syrupy tang of the peach. It was like sweet and savory hors d'oeuvres taken to a level of absurdity only the 1950s could reach. Think of it like a deconstructed ham and pineapple, only backwards, upside down, and slightly terrifying. These peach cups were a darling of church socials and Tupperware parties, when novelty on the table meant you were winning as a hostess. They were easy, cheap, and they looked like a lot of work, even if what they looked like was something you might feed a cartoon cat. Still, for all their visual offenses, Spam Fiesta peach cups had something enticing about them. And that does it for weird food that actually tasted good. If you got a good chuckle out of some of these, please let me know by hitting that like button. And while you're at it, subscribe to Memory Manor so you don't miss my next nostalgic journey. Thanks for dropping by.